Good morning, guys. I am Mama Bear to Many. I am mom to 15 children. This is going to be part of the pantry challenge. I think a lot of times people get intimidated by like soups. They feel like they have to find a specific recipe to make a specific soup. But soup can just be really easy to make and a really affordable way to use your leftovers. So we're going to talk about that today. So I do have my notes here, and I'm writing these down so that I can send them to my daughters. Quite a few of my daughters already know how to make soups, how we do it, no big deal. Others might need gentle reminders. So I am in the hospital with our 15th son, not 15th son. I always say that. I have 15 children, not 15 sons. I have 15 children. I have, my baby is a boy. I have 10 girls. A lot of you have corrected me. I don't think you have 15 sons, Mama Bear. You are correct. I do not have 15 sons. So, yeah, we're going to talk about soups. So I'm going to talk first about how to make a cream of soup. And this can go for anything. It could be for a cream of broccoli soup. It could be, we're probably going to do a lot of cream of celery. If you saw during the summer, we canned a lot. So we will have a lot of cream of celery because that's what we have canned. You can cream of anything type soup. I mean, you could have cream of green beans if you wanted to. So in order to do a soup like this, it is fairly basic. So you are just going to take whatever vegetable you have. I'm just going to go with broccoli. So if I'm going to use frozen broccoli, then I would use 3 bags of frozen broccoli. If I were to use quarts of something, I would drain that, and then I might use the liquid later, like for a cream of, say, celery soup. What I would do is I would strain the celery. I probably would do 3 quarts of whatever the cream of home canned thing is. So I would strain that off first, and then later on, instead of adding broth, I might add that type of liquid back in and then top it off with broth. So we have 3 bags of broccoli and or 3 quarts of canned whatever. You can also mix vegetables. You could do whatever type. You could do like celery, mushrooms, any vegetable really. So 3 bags of broccoli and or canned items, 2 onions chopped, and 8 potatoes chopped. You do not have to do the potatoes. Another option is to serve this over a carb instead of putting the potatoes actually in the soup. So you would chop all those up. You would saute all those in either half a cup of butter or half a cup of coconut oil. Please don't use margarine, guys. That is just a step away from plastic. Use real fats, real foods. You could use like old bacon fat if you wanted to. Yeah, so you're using about a half a cup of whatever said. I prefer healthy oils, so you're going to use half a cup of that, and you're going to saute that until your onions are translucent, the broccoli looks cooked, and the potatoes, they're almost done, or yeah, they're almost done. You want to cut the potatoes smaller like that if you're using them in a soup so that you don't have to like pre-do them. You could also just cut some old potatoes that you have in the fridge, chop those up small, and then you wouldn't need to saute it for as long. You're just waiting for the onions to get translucent. That's usually like when you would do that. Okay, so then you're going to add a thickener. So I'm going to add either half a cup of cornstarch, arrowroot, or flour. So I'm going to add that to it, mix it all around, and then I'm going to stir in 2 quarts of broth. That could be home canned broth, that could be boxed broth, that could be a combination of what you have left in your canning jars that you just strained off, and then some broth. It could be water if you wanted to. I just like to try to make it nutritionally dense, so therefore I would be trying to use broth if at all possible. So we're gonna cook that. It's just you're gonna like kind of just stir that in a little bit. Make sure you scrape the bottom of the pan so nothing gets stuck. And then that's going to thicken up just in a couple minutes. It's going to start to thicken up a little bit. So total 2 quarts of liquid. Don't go too far or else you could burn it. Then you're going to add in half a gallon of milk and turn it down. You're also at this point going to add seasoning. So basic seasoning for us is salt, pepper, adobo, and or onion powder, garlic powder. You could pretty much use any seasoning that your family likes. So that's our kind of go-to, would be salt, pepper, adobo, or onion, garlic powder, whatever we have. So we are going to mix all that together, and then you're going to cook it till it's done. It will get a little bit thicker. Make sure that you don't have it too high, because then it would like boil over. And even if that does happen, even if it gets a little bit scalded, usually it will still be okay. So that is cream of anything soup, guys. That is easy. So you can, there's, like I said, you can do it many different ways. You could serve that over a carb, either rice. That makes like a totally different dish than if you served it over, say, mashed potatoes, or you can add the potatoes inside of it. So you're taking this and you're just doing many different things. You could make bread bowls, you could serve it with bread, you could serve it with biscuits, you could serve it with scones. So many different ways that it would just make a different type of delicious meal. Like if you served this over rice and then you topped it with a little bit of cheese, it's almost gonna taste like a creamy casserole. You could also, say you had leftover soup like this, you made a big pot and you had some left over, you could actually just mix whatever leftover carbs you have in the fridge. Say you had leftover rice, works great. If you had leftover rice from a different meal and you wanted to recreate a meal, you could mix your cream of soup with the rice, and you'd put that in like a 9x13 pan or whatever size pan that's like that type of pan, top it with cheese, throw it in the oven, and then you have a casserole. You're all set. Another thing you could top it with, if you eat bread, you could top that with like breadcrumbs or like chunks of like toasted bread, cheese. Yeah, you could just make it into a yummy, delicious meal like that. The other thing I'm going to talk about is a lot of people say they don't like soup. And I think that's because it's not a hearty enough soup. A lot of men might say that they don't like soup, but if you make a nice hearty stew, I find that most men find it really enjoyable. So let's make a hearty stew. What we're gonna do is take 2 to 4 pounds of meat and 1 or 2 onions. So if you had, if you had one quart or 2 pounds of meat, so every quart that you can is actually 2 pounds of meat. So if you're using 2 quarts, that's 4 pounds of meat. That's a big soup. That's a big soup pot. Even for our size family, that would do a couple meals. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 to 4 pounds of meat, and we are going to add 1 or 2 chopped onions, and then seasoning. This is where we can get super different. So we could use Italian seasoning, we could use Creole seasonings, we could use adobo, we could use any of those like Montreal steak blend, any type of blend like that, just to give it a different seasoning. And you are going to saute that in some oil, probably again about half a cup of oil, sauteing that until the onions are translucent. If you have like meat that is not cooked yet, you'd want to make sure the meat was actually cooked. I tend to do soups with my canned meats because it just makes it quick and easy. So I'm pretty much making sure onions are translucent. If I'm using, say, not powdered onions, like onion, the dehydrated onions, if we're using those, then I'm just kind of making sure everything's sauteed and warmed together. So once I do that, then I'm going to add my thickener, similar to the cream of broccoli soup. And we are going to add half to 1 cup of thickener, depending on if I'm using 1 quart, 2 pounds, or 2 quarts, 4 pounds. It would be, if it was 4 pounds, it'd be like 1 cup. So then we're going to add either arrowroot, cornstarch, or flour. Now, we're going to add 1 to 2 quarts of broth, and then whatever veggies that you want. My arm was getting a little tired, So, yeah, we're going to use 1 to 2 quarts of broth, depending if you have 2 pounds of meat or 4 pounds of meat. So 4 pounds of meat would be 2 quarts. So you're going to add that broth, and then you're going to add canned vegetables. So my kind of general thing is you're going to add double the amount of vegetables to the amount of pounds. For instance, if you had 2 quarts of meat, that equals 4 pounds. So 2 quarts of meat is going to equal 4 pounds of meat. So you can do this with canned or with fresh or even frozen, as long as it's cooked all the way through. So you have 4 pounds of meat, so that means you're going to need 8 quarts of vegetables. And if I was using like the small cans, I probably would use 16, so you can see how big of a pot of soup this would be. If they are home canned, I would dump them in with the broth as much as I could, or with the like liquid that is canned in, because you get a lot of nutrients in there as well. So let's say we do 2 quarts of meat, that would be 4 pounds, so you'd do 8 quarts of vegetables. 1 quart of meat would be 2 pounds, which would be 4 quarts of vegetables. Different vegetables that I like to include in my soups, besides just the basics, I do summer squash, green beans, carrots, cabbage, peas. I try not to do too many carby type vegetables. Carrots are okay. You could also add, just because we do it a little different, like with sweet pea, you could also add potatoes. You could also add squash, like hard winter squash. Any vegetables that you have, you can add to a soup. Just kind of add it on that basis, and then you'll have a good all-around soup. Now, there's different ways to add your carb portion to your meal. If you want to, you can add rice or barley or potatoes or noodles or quinoa, whatever type of carb portion that you want to add to that. That's really up to you. I love soups for being able to throw leftover carbs into. Another thing that you could do, like I said with the other soup, is serving it right over something. So making mashed potatoes or even mashed sweet potatoes, make a little well in the center of your potatoes and just throw some thick soup like in there. If you're gonna do it like that, what I would do is I wouldn't put as much liquid into that. No, I said dump the whole jars into there. I probably would dump it so it was just covering the tops of all the meat and vegetables, and then I'd put that over the top. And then if I wanted to, what I could do is take that leftover vegetable stuff, and or I could use broth and make a thickened gravy and put that over the top of the vegetables. Yeah, yummy. So yes, you could serve that with a biscuit, you could serve it over rice, you could serve it over quinoa, you could serve it over mashed potatoes. It's really like unlimited, and because of that, it makes it such a different a meal each time. Another thing that you can do is you could take that soup, because it's thicker, you might need to put a little bit more flour or arrow or something in the bottom of that, thicken it up a little bit more, put it in a 9x13 pan, and then you could either top that with mashed potatoes, making your own style of a shepherd's pie. Another thing you could do was to take and make a pie crust and just lay it over the top. It doesn't have to be on the bottom, just lay it over the top. You could take and make cornbread and like plop that on the, pour that on the top. You could take biscuits and kind of plop that on the top. You could also make it a little bit wetter and make dumplings and just like dump dumplings into the soup, and or you could put dumplings into a pan and then throw it in the oven for just a little bit to warm up and cook them. Usually you need like a deeper dish for that. So many alternatives, so many things to do. Yeah, I'm trying to think. Some soups also you might want to serve with, say, like bread sticks or chips or something, where you kind of like taco soup's really good like that. You can just kind of dunk it, but it's basically the same sort of thing. So say you were making a beef stew. A beef stew might look like, in our household, 4 cans of meat. If we're doing stew, not served over something, it might be like 2 cans of meat, which is 4 pounds, and then the 8 quarts of vegetables. And those vegetables, if I'm not doing meat, would probably be like 2 things, potatoes, and then the rest other vegetables. But if I was serving it over, then I probably wouldn't do the potatoes. I would probably just put in a bunch of vegetables and serve that over mashed potatoes. Now, if I was doing the same type of thing for, say, like a taco type-ish soup, I might just put the meat, saute that, 2 to 4 pounds. I probably would do 4. And then I would add different vegetables. I would add, and I might add beans to that. So my vegetables might also include some black beans. So I might have tomatoes and cabbage and corn and beans, something like that, versus like carrots, potatoes, green beans. You see how it can like vary depending on what you want. So it just really depends. Something with chicken could be anything from like a chicken enchilada type style, and then you just do the seasonings according to that. But this is just an easy way to make either any cream of soup or any stew, and then those stews can also become other things. So you have soup one day, you don't have enough for everyone to have another full serving of soup, and then you throw it in the bottom of a pan and plop a bunch of mashed potatoes on top of it, and you have another meal. Put some mashed potatoes and then some cheese on top of it, and it's another meal too. So another thing is you could take and take the soup and serve it over rice, or you could mix rice into it and then top it with cheese, just like we did with the cream of soup, and throw it in the oven and you have something else. So this is a way just to be very creative with every tidbit of food that you have. Now you don't have to use cans of things. You don't have to use fresh meat. You could say, okay, we had Thanksgiving or turkey. We had turkey. We ate off the turkey. We boiled it down. I have this bag of meat. Eyeball it. Think about how much meat you have, and then follow the instructions like according to about like 1 pound, 2 pounds of meat that you have left over. Just do it like that. You can throw tidbits of meat, various types of meat, into a bag. Say you had steak one night, you had chicken the next night. Just throw those all in a bag, throw them in the freezer. When the bag looks full enough, then you make a big stew, or you make a shepherd's pie or something like that out of the stew. So I hope these tips are helpful, and I hope this makes sense for you all. So I hope you have a blessed and wonderful day. So I almost was going to upload this video, and I realized that I forgot to say, as far as vegetarian type soups, if you were using beans or a vegetarian alternative, you would just use that same amount of beans. So if we were doing, say, a bean-based thing, instead of using 4 pounds of meat, I would do the amount of that equivalated, yeah, in cups of beans. So 1 pound would be like 4 cups of beans, and then 2 pounds would be like 8 cups of beans. So yeah, I just kind of think of it like that. So I figured that I would say that. So just remember the amount of whatever the vegetables are. Say you're going to put like 8 quarts of vegetables in there, then you would want that same amount of like cups of your bean-based protein. Does that make any sense? If you're trying to do it dry, I would do half of that. So say you wanted 4 pounds, I would do like 4 cups of dry, and then have it cook like that. Does that make sense? But you'd have to make sure, like, if you were doing that, then you'd either need to soak it or be doing it like in an Instapot, so that you could cook your beans first and then add stuff to it. But the dry portion, unless you were doing like lentils or split peas or something like that in it that's tinier, then you could, smaller, then you could just throw it in there. But if not, then you really need to like either cook your beans first or have them fully soaked and be ready to and have like raw vegetables, or cook just the broth first. So just a little tidbit.